why I'm talking to you. I am an assistant director at the Oregon Department of Energy, and my division is responsible for nuclear safety and energy security in the state. A few of my colleagues are here in the meeting as well. We'll do some introductions, and so you all kind of know what we're doing here. This is the first of what may be multiple, but we'll see how it goes. Rulemaking Advisory Committee meetings for the Radioactive Material Transportation Fee Rulemaking Project. Right here in the title slide, OAR, that stands for Oregon Administrative Rule, number 345, and then Division 60. So if you are so inclined to track in your Oregon Administrative Rule book, if you have one, or online, you can find the actual reference to the rules we're going to be talking about. And we have some slides with some references there, but they're wordy. But we'll kind of get through the details here and ultimately kind of get to our goals and proceed with our project. So we'll go to the next slide here, Tom, and then Tom Jackman, if you can advance to slide one, just so people know a little bit about ODO, who may not have worked with us. We call ourselves ODO, Oregon Department of Energy. Here we are. It's kind of our generic title slide about all the things that we do. And they're kind of in the bottom of that bulleted point list, the specific tasks that we carry out. Our group does quite a few different things. The nuclear safety side of the house, where the folks here we're talking to you today, do actually nuclear safety as part of our job. We are the state's lead coordinating agency for nuclear emergency planning and response for what we call fixed nuclear sites, as well as for transportation. We work very closely with a lot of partners in that field, including Oregon Health Authority, and Hillary and Todd are on the line here today. Dr. Steve Reese from OSU, and quite a few other folks. So that's kind of just the general basics of what we are here. We also handle the program we're talking about today, which is the Radioactive Material Transportation Fee and Training Safety Program. So we'll kind of get into a little details about what the program involves and where the money goes and why we're all talking here today. So we go to the next slide here, Tom Jackman, and just kind of get to our agenda for today. Welcome and introductions. That's what we're doing right now. So why don't we do some introductions with everybody that we have, and there's Tom Failer coming in. Everybody on the line right now. I don't think everybody that was invited could make it, but this is sort of the best time we could possibly find. It's hard to schedule a meeting with 15 plus people. So thank you all for joining here today. I'll do a quick start around the Oregon Department of Energy staff, and then we'll dive into everybody else on the call here today. Tom Jackman, why don't you introduce yourself as our rulemaking coordinator, if you wouldn't mind?
Yeah, I am the rulemaking coordinator for the Energy Siting Council, which, if you aren't familiar, is the sort of governmental body that oversees the rules for the siting of energy projects, but also for the Oregon rules, administrative rules that govern the nuclear safety program, including obviously the rules in Division 60 that we're going to be discussing here today.
Thanks, Tom. How about Tom Cecilia?
Hi, everybody. Tom Cecilia. I am the Hanford hydrogeologist and fuel specialist on the team. I lead the radioactive waste determination rule set and do a lot of work on Hanford policy.
Thanks, Tom. Matt Hendrickson.
Hi, I'm Matt Hendrickson, also with ODO here, the radioactive waste remediation specialist. I work on the tank farm issues at Hanford and other in-state waste issues and whatever might come up for our division. I have a little bit of background in transportation as well, so I've done a little bit of the work on this rack.
Thanks, Matt. Mark Reese.
Hey, good morning. Mark Reese, Nuclear Emergency Program Coordinator, and I'm also the lead for the Radioactive Material Shipments Program.
Cool. Thanks, Mark. So that's everybody from the Oregon Department of Energy. Why don't we just go down the screen that I have in front of me. Tiffany Brown, if you wouldn't mind, you happen to be first on my list.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Tiffany Brown. I am the Lane County Emergency Manager. I've been an emergency manager for about 15 years, and I am also the local government stakeholder for the Oregon Seismic Safety Policy Advisory Commission, OSPAC. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Tiffany. How about Jess Brown?
Good morning, all. Jess Brown, Oregon Department of Transportation. Currently, I'm the interim safety and enforcement program manager. I had just a little background for me. About 27 years with ODOT, about 18 and a half years as the hazardous waste transportation specialist. And I spent, a good year up at Trojan doing a lot of those inspections coming out of there, the core, all that kind of stuff. So anyway, that's who I am. And I guess at some level, some of these dollars filter through us because of our connectivity to the trucking side of things. And so then we process them out to you guys.
Yeah, thanks, Jess. We can talk about the program details in a few other slides here. I didn't realize you worked at Trojan. That's good. Thanks. Todd Carpenter.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Todd Carpenter with Oregon Health Authority Radiation Protection Services. I've been in partnership with ODO for many years regarding special permitting of radioactive material waste, emergency response training, and working through several intergovernmental agreements with ODO. Good to see you all today.
Thanks, Todd. Hillary Haskins.
Good morning, everyone. Hillary Haskins, she, her. I'm the Operations and Emergency Response Manager for our Radiation Protection Services. Sorry, my coffee hasn't quite kicked in yet. And as Todd just said, we are the ones who issue all the special permits. So every single one of them goes through our office. I have been with the state officially for 11 years as of yesterday. And I've been working a lot in response and inspections for a very long time. So.
Thanks, Hillary. Heather Langlowis. I'm sorry if I didn't pronounce your name right.
That was actually pretty good. It's Heather Langlois. I'm a terminal manager for, very close. That was better than most. I am the terminal manager for CAS Transportation. My facility is located right next to the Hanford Nuclear Site in Richland, Washington, and I guess I'm on here because I pay for all these permits.
Yes, you do.
As a matter of fact, I just was looking at my bill from you guys. So yeah, we transport anything from nuclear fuel rods to waste to, natural. And so when I was invited, my boss decided, well, it's good to have an ear on here. So here I am.
Well, for sure. Thank you, Heather. We really appreciate your time and joining today. Mark Gibson.
Good morning. I'm Mark Gibson. I'm from the Oregon Trucking Association. I'm the Government Relations Policy Advisor. And I know Jana, the president, was invited, but I'll be the one that'll be attending these meetings. So thank you.
That's great. Thanks, Mark. I appreciate it. The third Tom Thaler.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. Tom Thaler, Radiation Safety Officer with Radiation Protection Services. As a duty officer, we interface with ODO with special permitting, emergency response, exemptions, things like that.
Yep. Thanks, Tom. Much appreciated. Mariah Rollins.
Hi, good morning. Mariah Rollins. I'm an Assistant Chief Deputy for the Department of State Fire Marshal, and I oversee the statewide hazmat teams.
Thanks, Mariah. Steve Reese.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Steve Reese. I'm Director of the Radiation Center at Oregon State University. We do occasionally ship Yellow 3 radioactive materials packages. Not very often, but it does happen occasionally. Also participate in a lot of training related to hazmat, radiological hazmat over the last 25 years. And if it looks like I'm crying, it's not because I'm attending the meeting. It's because I'm getting hit by my kryptonite, which is grass seed pollen. It's rather bad. Yesterday,
those who are allergic to grass seed pollen, Corvallis may not be the best location.
Yeah, it's
grass seed capital.
Yep.
Fair enough.
Thank you.
Okay. Last on my list of people who have joined is Sage DeLong. Last but not least, Sage.
Yep, I'm the Umatilla County Emergency Manager here based out of Pendleton. That's all I got.
Thanks, Sage. Much appreciated. Great. We have a expected list of RAC members, and just for my team, the only person I don't see that has joined, I was invited, was Simone from Columbia Riverkeeper. I don't know if she could make it or not. Didn't hear from her. Okay. Thanks, everybody. So as your representative for your organizations, the way this sort of works in function is, like I mentioned, we have obviously today's meeting. We expect that we'll probably need another meeting or two, just kind of see how the conversation goes. We don't put really any firm, bounds on the dialogue, and if we're having good talks and things we still want to talk about, we'll have more meetings. That's important to have a process that takes the time it needs, as long as we have a goal in mind to kind of work towards a goal. But don't want to shut it off. Your organization has been nominated to serve on this RAC by the Energy Facilities Siting Council, but the person who sits on that, who represents your group, thank you for joining. If you need to make a change or can't make a meeting, that's okay. Just let us know. There's no process. Some people ask, oh, am I specifically nominated to be on this committee? Your organization is, but we're all representative of our organization. So if that comes up and you sort of can't serve as the process goes on, that's okay. Just let us know and try and find someone else to sit in that seat. Okay, so here's the agenda. We're going to go through some basics of what the rulemaking process looks like, and then we'll get into the details about the actual the fee and some history and the money and what it's used for. Sort of we have this list of discussion items to go through. We ask that you come and ask questions. Share as much input as you can. The intention of these meetings is to be open, to be topical, to kind of focus on what we're trying to focus on. But really, it's to share information, to share perspectives, and to take all the information in that we can, and sort of make sure that we're sort of hashing out the issues as you see them that you want to talk about. So then we'll talk about a schedule for another meeting later after today's meeting. And then at the very bottom here, it says we'll provide minutes and provide a summary of the membership comments before the next meeting, that kind of thing for sure. Okay. While I was yakking on there, looks like Tammy Summers joined. Tammy, do you want to introduce yourself? I'm sorry you missed the other introductions, but welcome.
I am so sorry I'm late. I had a last minute appointment real quick. Good morning, everybody. I'm Tammy Summers with Hitman Transport. Apparently I'm late, so I'm going to let you guys go ahead.
Thanks, Tammy. Appreciate you joining. Much appreciated. Okay. Why don't we go on to the next slide here? Tom Jackman. Oh yeah, this is just a summary of who we expected to be on the RAC. And like I said, as an example, I see Jan is on here, but understand that Mark, you're filling that seat for the OTA. Totally fine. We just sort of were, putting together a list of who we expected to be in this meeting here. Next slide, please. So Tom Jackman, I'm going to throw it over to you and let you talk about the rulemaking process. And we'll note, Tom, if you wouldn't mind talking about who the actual decision maker here in this in the rules is. It's not us.
Yeah, so the rulemaking process is pretty standard across agencies. It's kind of driven largely by statute, but essentially the decision-making body here is the Energy Siting Council, who is in charge, who owns these rules, and they're the ones who initiated this rulemaking a few months ago. And so, but the initiation is sort of like, okay, now you can start on it. It's not, we call this the informal rulemaking phase. And it's informal because there are no set prescribed statutes that require the rules to be developed in a certain way. So we've elected to have a rulemaking advisory committee and to use that and the help of that committee to develop a draft set of proposed rules. So that's where we are right now. Once those draft proposed rules are developed, we will then take them in front of the council and say, here's what we were thinking. What do you guys think? And if they like them, then we issue a notice of proposed rulemaking based on those rules, which would start a formal public comment period. And then based on those comments, that we might further tweak the rules, take them back in front of council, who would then authorize them. So it's a pretty straightforward regulatory process, but we are sort of here at the start. Anybody have any questions about this or anything?
Yeah, Tom, Jack, maybe just add a little more context. You know, in the spirit of transparency and disclosure and openness about this process, a RAC in Oregon State, it's not necessarily a unanimous decision body. Like we may have disagreement. I just want to kind of set the expectations here. It's certainly possible with this many people in this many positions, we may disagree, and that's okay. That's part of the process. When we ultimately go back to the siting council, and it's 7 members, those members are appointed by the governor herself to serve on that council. When we go back in front of the governor and present the results of the RAC and some proposed rules, we will always present all the various opinions, ones that may be in disagreement with what we ultimately put forward as recommendations to the council. And also, I want everybody to know that just because you're on the RAC doesn't mean you can't also provide comment to FSEC directly at the public comment period. And in fact, I would encourage it. If you have, you know, good, bad, or other things to say about the proposals that come out of this committee, please feel free at that time to speak directly to the council. Basically, we want to make sure people know this is an open process. You have access to not only us as the staff, but also to the decision-making body, direct access. We won't filter you. We won't sort of take your words and twist them around. We give you direct access should you choose to take it, share whether it's written comments or presentations at the end. So I just want to make sure that's clear. Everybody knows this is a very open process. And so you have access to all the people you want to have access to. You can have access to me, to Tom Jackman, to our team. You know, after this meeting, you can feel free to email, call us directly, but this is sort of the spirit of openness. We really take that to heart, and this is how we work this process. Okay, any questions right now?
Well, one last thing I just wanted to mention in that we did actually just do a recent change from a direction by the governor in an effort to make the rulemaking process more open. There's quite a few tweaks were directed our way, but I think the most significant one for this body is that if any RAC member submits written comments to the RAC, then we are required to post those to the rulemaking page. So people who go to this, you know, hear about this rulemaking, they go to the website. There's going to be a page for this rulemaking. They click on it. They'll see that there was a meeting, and any comments shared as a result of this meeting will be posted there. So if you make oral comments here, we will have the whole recording of this available for people to see, but we're not going to necessarily call those out individually. But if you do submit written comments, those will be posted individually. So just so people know.
Yeah. Thanks, Tom. Spirit of transparency. Cool. Okay. Let's talk just a little bit since we're on the rulemaking process, maybe a schedule. In my mind, by the end of this calendar year would be ideal to have the rules sort of in front of FSEC and maybe a final decision made by the end of the calendar year. But like I mentioned earlier, we're not putting sort of time bounds on for just the sake of being time bound. We want to make sure we have the right dialogue and have the meetings we need to have and the dialogue we need to have to get to a good process. So that's important. All right, why don't we go on to the next slide, and we'll kind of get into some of the fundamentals here. Just start at the beginning. Why do we do this? Because the statute tells us to do it. Oregon Revised Statute 469-605 provides the statutory authority right here. It's sort of, I cut a few snippets out from the statutes to share. And basically, number 1 says you have to have a permit from the Energy Facility Siting Council to ship radioactive material in Oregon. That's the very fundamental there. Fundamental number 4, there's 2 or 3, but I cut down to number 4, is that we can collect a fee for that permit. And that fee in statutory language says the amount reasonably calculated to provide for the cost of the department of performing the duties under some other statutes. We can share those as well. And then number 6 is also important that when it says director, this case is the director of the Oregon Department of Energy. And then she delegates towards us to do this task for her. Then furthermore, it says that the director can delegate to ODOT to issue those permits, which has been done. And that's the process we do now. Any questions on the statute? Obviously, there's things that I didn't print on the slide because there's a lot of words in the statute, but these are the fundamental references grounding for why we do what we do. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. So there's also rules. So the council has adopted rules to implement the statutes. And here are a couple of the rules that we've, again, selected to share right now with some snippets about the specifics. So you can see that, sub 1 here, the rules apply to shipments of radioactive material by means other than train. And that's interesting. That's sort of a carve out for train, other than rail cars. It also exempts federal shipments in federal vehicles, which of course seems pretty specific that if it's a federal shipment, but in a contract carrier, then you're subject to the permit and the fee. But if you're a federal government in a federal vehicle, then that's excluded. And then the last point we want to make clear is that it's intent to be consistent with US DOT and NRC rules for shipments. And so just as a fundamental, the way that our rules, I don't think I snipped this out on other slides, but the permit and the associated fee applies to transportation of placarded material. That's how we decided, that's the level of where we decided, okay, if you get a placard, you have to have a placard for radioactive material from US DOT. That's the trigger for also needing an Oregon permit. And that's in rule as well. It is not our intention to discuss that trigger. We could, but it seems reasonable for us that a placarded DOT shipment is a reasonable way to start, and frankly, to trigger the permit requirements for Oregon is to stick with that DOT connection there, federal DOT, and I think that's a good idea. But we can talk about that if you want to, if the rep wants to. So anyway, to be fundamental there. Okay, what's on the next slide here, Tom? The fees itself. Okay. The fee for the permit, this is kind of getting down to some meat and potatoes about what we do here. The fee is set in rule. Not all fees in Oregon state government are set in rule. Some are set in statute. This one is set in rule. And some aren't even in rule or statute, but this one is in rule. And the fee was last touched in 1983. It's quite a ways old. At that time, this is over the quote here. This is from rule. The fee is $70 for each placarded shipment. And then there's these other two specific notes here about an annual cap of $500 for shipments of these three specific types of shipments: well logging material, radiographic material, and radiopharmaceuticals. And then there's a temporary permit that has a $100 fee. So there you go. That's sort of where the fees were set. They haven't been touched in many years, 42 years. So as we'll show you on another slide, that fee was probably high at the time, frankly, and it is no longer so, based on our sort of assessment of the money we use for what we do with it and some other state comparables that we've looked at. But here we are. This is where it sits right now. Okay, let's go to the next slide, Tom, if you wouldn't mind. I'm going to throw it over to Mark Reese and let him talk about what actually happens with that money. Once we collect it, we do training. We use that money for training. Mark, go ahead.
Thanks, Max. So the fees have been collected to go into a fund that's used to pay for training, for first responder training. That was the intent. Originally, some of those fees were also used to purchase equipment, but in many years, they've been used primarily for paying for training for first responders. That would be the hazmat teams, first receivers, the hospitals, and those folks. Trainings are held annually, more frequently if we need to. We have a training class that's held in Corvallis annually. A year ago, we also moved one of the trainings over to Eastern Oregon, which we call the Corridor, which is I-84, basically from Pendleton down through Ontario. We did another training last month in La Grande, and we intend to go back out there again next year. Trainings are a team effort, so they're held in conjunction with Oregon Health Authority staff and Oregon State University. We also have interagency agreements or grants that are used for pass-throughs through Oregon Health Authority, Office of Radiation Protection Services, and also through OSU, through Dr. Steve Reese's program. So that's essentially where those fees go for when people pay the fees that goes into this fund.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I think that's really the core message we want to share is this money, the money we collect in almost exclusively is used for training purposes. Odo takes in the money, and then we have agreements with Oregon State University and Oregon Health Authority, as Mark just mentioned, in fact, to Steve Reese's shop and Todd Carpenter and Hillary, who actually do the training for us. And we support some travel costs for people who are taking the training to come to those locations if they're not nearby where they're being held. And that's what the money's used for. There is a little bit of money used for administrative of sort of Mark's time, internal Odo time to coordinate that. But it's otherwise exclusively used for those training classes. You can, if you remember back to the statute, the statutory directive says collect a fee that's appropriate for conducting the activities associated with this program is basically what it is. And so that's what we do. And that's how we do it for transparency's sake, just to tell you what we do. That's how we implement this program. And that's what the money goes to. Any questions about that? No? Okay. Let's go on to the next slide here. But maybe I should mention one more thing about go back to the previous slide on the previous part. So this, I should also be clear that there is other training that happens under other funding sources, just sort of the full picture of how we do training. U.S. Department of Energy also provides some money for some training along the east, particularly in Northeast Oregon, Eastern Oregon, I-82 and I-84, for when shipments may eventually come through from the Hanford site. So there's some additional funding that is sort of very specific towards that type of training related to Hanford material that might be moved around through Oregon. So when we put together, our training program and our pot of money, we actually kind of put together a few pools of money, this fee money generated from the permits, and then also for some specific needs that Hanford U.S. Department of Energy originated money, which again passes through us, and then we pass out for training purposes. So just from that administrative side, that's sort of where the lay of the land is. That Hanford DOE money has to go to specific locations for use along first responders or other emergency response personnel along I-82 or I-84 where a shipment from Hanford could go. The fee money, of course, is used across the state and can be used where the need is greater, and we have this money for training.
If I can just add something, Max, to that.
Yeah, go ahead.
So when we track the annual shipments annually, there's activity I-80 or I-84 corridor, 97 corridor, and I-5. So again, those Hanford specific shipments, which there is a different fund, covers everything from 82, 84, again, going as soon as they come into the state of Oregon, Hermiston, going out through Farewell Bend, going out near Ontario.
Thanks, Mark. Tiffany, got a question here. Are there outstanding gaps, needs of the training program? We'll get to that in a slide here. It's a good question. We want to make sure that the training, it's always a balance, right? We've got some money, we've got some training needs. We want to make sure everybody has the right skill set to protect our state, protect our environment, and try to find that balance. So we'll talk about that. We actually have some slides queued up exactly for that discussion. Jackman, why don't you go on the next slide if you wouldn't mind? Okay, a little more details about how the fees are collected. We note here the burden's on the carriers, so thanks to the carriers for joining and for OTA. This is sort of where it shakes out. So you bear the responsibility, and these are sort of the details here about sort of how the fee is collected and sort of that relationship between Odo and Oregon Department of Transportation, where the permits are issued and then the fee money is collected and sort of routed back through to Odo, sort of out that process as I described earlier. Placarded shipments, made a note about that's how the trigger the U.S. Department of Transportation placarded shipments trigger the Oregon permit requirement. And we got a chart here on the number of shipments. And this is kind of a slide that we're also going to transition into some more details about the money. And you can see from the number of shipments that we track, roughly declining from a higher number. And this is at 2010 is about as far back as we have data to track. I've been on the job for 5 years. Mark, you've been on the job for at least twice that. Before our time, there was more, we believe there was more shipments in the 2000s, even the 90s. And that fee at $70 from the early 80s was probably was adequate to support the program. And the program, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, but the pot of money built up a surplus. And we've been declining with the declining number of shipments over the years, as well as costs increasing as they do. We're kind of getting to the meat and potatoes here, is that the money is declining and we're spending it faster than we're bringing it in. And so that's kind of why we're talking today. But here you can see the shipments, the number of shipments are declining. Roughly speaking, 2020 had a jump up there, but overall they're somewhat declining. We don't have 2024s finalized yet, but Mark, I think it'll show another decline a little further down the ladder there. Sage, go ahead.
Yeah, are these shipments, are they just in, because rail isn't included in the cost, are these just shipments through trucking, or do we have numbers?
Yeah. Yep, just trucks. Okay. That's right, yep. We say number of shipments, it's the ones that have a permit attached. That's how we track.
So we don't have the knowledge of how many, maybe of how many shipments, if the rule changing was to occur, have transpired from rail. I'm just wondering if these shipments going down is correlating to not having to pay a permit fee and that going to rail. Just a question.
I hadn't thought about that. I might look to the industry if they have any insight into that. I don't know. Any insight on train or how the shipments might, for anybody else know? Yeah, I wish I could answer the question, Sage. I'm really not sure. We're quite sure why the shipments have declined, what's happening. It's not just waste. I kind of sometimes get myself even confused. It's not just waste. We're talking medical devices, anything else that's placarded gets a permit. So there's a lot of different types of material or devices or whatever would require the permit. So it's a wide range of things.
So also a lot of places will do their best to not have to placard. And there's still going to be things that have to be, obviously, but there's just not as much waste to transport or materials that are in use to transport. So even with like our highest sources, which are industrial radiography gauges, those are at a level 2 because they want to make sure that they have so much shielding around them that they don't need to placard because they can basically get around it. And I think with rail, even if you use rail, you do still have to use a truck eventually. Rail will only get you so far. It's not like they have trains directly from site to site. So that would be my guess, but I'd have to do a little more investigation.
Yeah, that's a good point, Hillary. Although, trains could just go right through Oregon and not stop if there was shipment. We're certainly aware of shipments that originate outside of Oregon, go through Oregon somewhere else, right? From Washington, California, as an example. That happens. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. We'll kind of keep talking here. Concerns and cost-saving measures. Okay, let's go down one more if you wouldn't mind. Tom? Matt Hendrickson, do you want to describe this slide?
Yes. So this slide, really, you can see it starts in 2010. That's the leftmost bar in blue. Goes all the way through 2023, kind of shows it's correlated roughly to the numbers of shipments we've gotten. And we started with roughly $120,000 in the bank for this program in 2010. And it has declined to a little over 60,000 as of 2023. I do believe numbers are closer to 50,000 this year. And at the bottom, you can kind of see the surplus deficit each year. That's the yellow graph. And if you remember from the previous numbers, that one year that we had really low shipments was 2022. If I'm not mistaken, it's about 138 shipments. And you can see we ran a significant deficit that year. So what we're trying to show here is the decline in the savings we have in this program, and showing what the average decline is. Between the more recent numbers of 2016 to 2023, we are averaging approximately a $7,000 deficit each year. Over the time frame 2016 to 2023, again, we collected about $120,000, but expended $172,000. On average, our revenue collection is only 70% of our expenditures in this program. So if shipment numbers continue to decline, we will have rather large budget deficits. And at this time, using the $7,000 average deficit, we have maybe 7 years of funding left. If things are closer to 2022 and the low shipment numbers that we've had, we might have closer to 3 years. So at best, we're looking at 7 years of funds remaining in this program.
Thanks, Matt. Mark, you got your hand up. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, kind of going back to the rail truck thing. So if I understand correctly, the only way we track truck transports is through the issuance of permits, correct?
Yes.
And so does anybody track rail transports?
Might look to our friends at Oregon DOT, because we don't. ODOT?
Okay.
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, I know the hazmat fellows in the rail section. They're housed with us now. They've been moved into CCD. I can check with them and see if I can get some information on these types of shipments, how many, where, what, that kind of thing. So I can get back to you. It'll probably be a couple of weeks. I'm out of town this week. I'm out of town next week as well.
It'd be good data to have. I agree. It'd be nice to know more information about trains. That's one of the questions we have. So in addition to having a discussion here about the fee and the actual number, the dollar amount, there's a couple policy questions, and that train is a question. Other states, from what we can tell, do require, not all states, some states require train shipments of rad material to have a state permit and a fee too. Okay.
Thanks.
We'll look into that. Yeah, thank you. It's a good question. All right. Tammy, you're putting some things in the chat here. PIMSIS grants available for training. Have we looked into grants available for training? You mean as a supplement to, Tammy, you mean as like a supplement to the fee-driven training?
Yes. PIMSA sets aside a sizable amount of money to assist states, local governments, smaller places for training purposes. I do not know the deadlines and all of that because obviously I'm not eligible for them. But it is an idea. You could potentially supplement a little bit if the funding keeps going down.
Okay, I appreciate that. I haven't looked into those grants. Other sources of money. It's a good idea. Has anybody on our team or in state government worked with these grants before on this call?
Okay, the Department of State Fire Marshal is the administrator of those grants, the HMEP grant, and our teams, our hazmat response teams, do benefit from those grants.
Do you use them for radiological training, or is it other hazardous material types of trainings?
It's a local grant, so it's whatever their individual, either their LEPC or their fire agency chooses to train. So I think there is some RAD training, but it's probably not the primary thing that they're training on.
Okay. Okay. It's good to keep in mind. Thanks, Mariah. Let's go to the next slide. Wanted to share just a little bit of the ways that government is trying to save some money and some cost savings actions here, limiting travel. And in fact, we found it was not just limiting travel, but holding the course on both a west side and an east side location actually saves money, because then people don't have to travel, more people don't have to travel across the state. If we held it only in Corvallis, which we used to do, then people would have to travel longer, and that's a little more expensive. So by holding a training course like we did in La Grande earlier this year, it actually costs a little bit less. Reducing number of courses, we want to make sure the training is we have the right number of training available for the right people at the right time. And if it's just one course per year, maybe that's okay. But in a big state with diverse, shipping and routes and risks, I certainly like the model of having an east and a west side training opportunity annually. That seems like a good spot for us to be in, to make sure we get people where they're at. And we have a note here about upcoming DOE shipping campaigns require more training. I mentioned more shipping that could come from Hanford, or is going to come from Hanford. That training will be funded by US DOE money. So we're trying to be diligent in how we spend the fee money as opposed to US DOE grant money, to make sure that that training is paid for appropriately by DOE. And of course, you get the benefit of having trained up on rad materials safety. You can also apply it to anything else that might come, but it's only available for training in I-82, I-84 corridor for that DOE types of campaign. That will happen, by the way. So probably a lot of people on this call will be involved in a couple of years' time when DOE Hanford ramps up a few shipping campaigns they have planned for shipping various waste materials off the site through Oregon for final disposal elsewhere. And then training will have, Tom, Cecilia, prior to 2028, we'll do some major trainings on US DOE funding related to the Hanford shipments. So I guess that's not that many years out. And then limited administrative spending. Like I mentioned earlier, we spend most of the money on grants to OSU and Oregon Health Authority to fund their work doing the training itself. Okay. Jackman, go on the next slide if you wouldn't mind. So these are some concepts. I want to be clear that these are the concepts we were throwing out here today. And this is for discussion. We mentioned here on the left the 1983 number of $70, if you just simply adjusted for inflation, would be around $230 today for that fee. And then the 500 annual would be up to $1,640. That's not what we're proposing. Right now, we would like to consider $100 for a permit, for the individual permit, and then just as a place to start that discussion. And then we'd also like to talk about future needs. With a fee set in rule, you either have to come back every couple of years as inflation eats into that cost and adjust the rule to adjust the fee, if you want to keep that balanced, or we can set in rule some type of a future increase with inflation or some other step up approach, whatever that might be. We could do that in rule now. We have options, so we have some options, but I'd like to talk about that also. Well, that's a place for us to kind of consider the cost. Let's go to the next slide, and then I think we have two more content slides, and maybe we can then open up for some real specific discussions here. New revenue streams, it's another option. I didn't put the grants on here though, so that's a good idea to track down the PIMSA DOT grants. Mention the railroads, new revenue streams. Railroads are excluded. They could be included. That's something that is not excluded for any legal reason. They could be included. Temporary permits, it's a little trickier to track. Temporary permits are mostly in-state, a little harder to track down, but we could do more on that. And then there's the exclusions. We could always change some of the exclusions. And then around the federal shipments, we could also make a change to federal shipments and federal trucks pay the fee. I don't think that's a legal prohibition. That's simply set in rule. So there's some options we could implement there. And I'd like to talk about those also. And then finally, if you go to the next slide, this is the sort of the last, maybe call it policy consideration slide I have on here about that fee structure. And I just talked about this a little bit earlier, was about changing the fee upward, potentially $100 per shipment, $750 industry cap, $250 temporary permit, and then open questions about how and if do we consider building in future cost increases, or is the proposal of the RAC to just come back in a couple of years and let's talk if we need to adjust it at that time. That's an option as well. Clearly, with a rule that hasn't been changed since 1983. It seemed to work for a while. And now we're saying we need to make a change. Okay. But doing a rulemaking once every, 30 many years, 42 years, I guess, is probably not what we do the next time. But we don't have to wait that long. We could come back in a couple of years and talk about it. So we've got options is basically our bottom line here. So that's really the end of our PowerPoint and sort of our basic presentation here to the group. I'd love to have conversation. Like, how does all this land? What do people think about the things we've talked about here, the higher fee option, about potentially, raising the fee, either set in rule with an inflation adjustment, thinking about the train shipments. I'd like to open it up and see if there's any sort of dialogue and people are bold enough to jump in and share their thoughts. Anybody, or people just very happy pitched it.
Oh, go ahead, Mark.
Go ahead, Lynn.
I was just going to say I'll speak up if nobody else will, and I already mentioned my point. I think for me anyway, it's really important to sort of understand the whole dynamic of the train shipments. I mean, are they paying in a different way? I think that's important for me to sort of get a real overall picture of kind of what we're looking at.
Okay. Make sure that they're paying their fair share, so to speak.
I'm sure. Yeah.
Maybe I'll put those words in. Those are my words, but making sure that understanding the situation about what the
exactly
is. Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
So thanks, Max. That was really thorough. Hillary from RPS. So we are the ones who Odo taps to do the training for all of our hazmat teams. And having this is really helpful for us. So in addition to emergency response, our primary role is to regulate use of radioactive materials and x-rays in the state. So generally what we try to do is couple training with our inspectors. So like we travel all over the state, and the idea is we set up training with hazmat or first responders and first receivers annually. We have a bit of a budget for it, but it's only for the main transportation corridors, as Mark Reese mentioned earlier. So if we want to be able to get to more places, then we would definitely need to have more funding to do that. And the reason why it's really important for radiation to be taught is HAZWOPER does not cover radiation incidents. So all of your the truckers, they if they have HAZWOPER, they are good at all the other CBRN, are not, they're basically good at everything that's hazardous, that's not nuclear or radiological. And so that's why it's also really important for our hazmat teams and our first receivers to get this sort of training so they do know how to respond. Radiation tends to be a very small portion of any of their training at all. So, and it's one of those things where it's rare, but it's high impact if it does happen. So that's why we want to make sure that we're training folks along the way, so that if an incident did happen, and that's why we're getting more training for I always forget what it's called. Sorry, Mark. The true shipments. So that's why we're focusing on those right now, but it's really important for all of our others because we do have a lot of just general shipments that happen within the state, say with nuclear medicine, there are some waste treatments that come through, mostly from California up to Hanford. So we really want to make sure that we have enough funding to provide that training for our first responders and first receivers.
Thanks, Hillary. You got a few acronyms in there. TRUE is transuranic waste. I don't know if anybody else outside of the nuclear defense industry uses that acronym, but it's that's how they use it there. Steve Reese, go ahead.
Could you go back a couple slides to the bar graph that showed the deficit and positive spending over time? Yeah, there you go. So this is representing basically, it's year-end balances. And
Yeah,
so
the blue bars are the money that's sort of declining in the pot that we have. That number N01, that's just an accounting number. This came from our accounting folks.
Yeah, and so having the money in the pot allows you to project in the following fiscal year. That kind of thing allows for that kind of flexibility. Yeah. So I guess I'd be a proponent of establishing some sort of baseline based upon this chart, and then increasing it with the cost or inflation costs going forward to see how that holds. Because I have a feeling inflation's going up over the next couple of years. That's as good as marker as any to keep up with costs. So that's what I'd propose.
Yeah, Todd Carpenter.
I was just curious, does Odo have the statutory or rule authority if somehow we had surplus funds that we could focus on getting equipment out to update the hazmat and first receiver equipment?
I think we do. Yeah, the statute's pretty open. It says we shall use the fee for funding the needs of the program.
It would be kind of cool to kind of put that in our lens as part of the mission. Training, yeah, but also maybe if we could get some equipment started, that would be cool.
Okay, we'll keep that in mind. Equipment needs, well, those you'd like to love them, the handheld devices, things like that. Those aren't cheap, and they require an annual calibration, right? So you have to keep them up to date.
So on the annual calibration, we've actually put out a statement from CRCPD and the ANSI standards that first receivers and first responders don't have to do an annual check depending on what they're using it for. And that's something that I can include and add here later. But essentially, it's like us as the regulator, we have to have it annually. But if you're a first responder and you're literally just there to see is radiation present, and you have a check source, you don't have to get an annual calibration.
Did that come out of ANSI, you said, Hillary?
Mm-hmm. I think it was ANSI or one of those. Maybe it was NCRP. I get all my acronyms confused. I'll search for it and I'll add it here. But we have put that in place. NCRCPD, which is the Control Radiation Program Director Conference, has put together a task force to review the NCRP statement. That was based on an ANSI standard. I think that's how it went. So that is something that we would be able to put out so that, because the idea is it would reduce costs for our first receivers and first responders.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Does it reduce if you don't have to do a calibration, all you need to know if they're radiation present or not, is there a cheaper type of device that you could use that's not the fancy, which isotope is it kind of a thing?
Oh, absolutely. They don't need to have a RID. They could just have like a pancake or something else. Even then, like we used to give hospitals radiation kits, detector kits. And so it was just like one detector with a couple of different probes on it. And so we have a lot of those just kind of sitting in our lab right now because the hospitals didn't want to keep up the calibration and they weren't using them. They were kind of just gathering dust. So yeah, they absolutely would not have to have a RID. So that's a radiation isotope identification detector. I think that's what it stands for. Basically, it's a fancy thing that tells you what you're looking at.
Okay. We can look into the sort of costs and what that might mean to have equipment. I would ask maybe Tiffany, Sage, Mariah, folks who are county and state emergency managers. Would you use equipment? Is there a need for equipment? Just, I don't know if to answer that now. Good if you can. But is that something that your crews have a need for?
I would say for our hazmat teams, I mean, our teams are primarily funded by petroleum load fee, and they do have monitors, and we do annual testing, right? Career firefighters are going to want all the testing available for their equipment and calibration and things like that. And there's always a need for additional equipment dollars and always an interest in additional training. And our teams benefit significantly from this program. So definitely, interested in how we keep it going.
Okay. Thanks. Tiffany.
I would just acknowledge that I'm in a relatively new county, and so I'm happy to survey, but I think Mariah's probably is familiar with what's happening on the ground. The regional hazmat team is tied into my agencies, but it's an interesting question and a good opportunity for me to learn more about it.
Okay. Yeah, if you're willing to go talk to the county responders and see if what their needs really are and how that might be met. We can talk about it. Who's up? Mark.
So there was a request a couple of years ago during one of the regional hazmat meetings that fire marshal's office facilitated. And one of the teams, and I think it was one of the teams based in Eugene, had a need to replace equipment. And of course, we didn't have adequate funding in this fund to be able to help them with that. So I know that they applied for different funding to get that. But that's an example where the intent of the fund originally was for training and also equipment. And now it's not adequate. If someone said, hey, I needed to replace a dozen Ludlums, there's no way we could support that. We could support the training itself, and Mariah maybe she was at that meeting, can recall that I had to say, I can facilitate some training, but I can't buy anything right now. And that was hard, especially when I know that this fund was originally set up to facilitate those teams getting equipment replaced.
Okay. Sage.
I think, our hazmat team is out of Hermiston. We're kind of in a unique position here for Umatilla County. But those shipments also travel quite a distance. So the response time of those teams can lengthen. So I think for those response teams, yes, it would be nice to help them with equipment, but it might be necessary to look at some of the other agencies and how far they would have to travel to even respond. I mean, you're looking at sometimes an hour, 2 hours of response time, and just some minimal equipment would be helpful. I think, looking down the corridor for those local fire agencies, you'd have to be careful. I love my firefighters, love everybody I work with, but me included, sometimes I really want equipment that may not necessarily be utilized. But if it meets a certain threshold, I think that that would be great. And I think, not speaking for the trucking association or anybody, but keeping those guys safe as well, and having the knowledge that if they're shipping material by rail or by truck through corridors, that there would be equipment that you would know and be able to utilize with a small time frame. Because I mean, you're looking at if you guys are trying to get information, or OHA or anybody, sometimes that response time is pretty high. If it happened in Umatilla County, we're getting there pretty quick, but La Grande or Baker City or somewhere there, it would be interesting to see if, and talking with the local hospitals, I don't think we have a lot of radiation equipment being utilized. So I think that would be a great idea. I think we just have to ensure that if if it was equipment, I would first start with training, and then move towards equipment, because I think that the training comes first. You could have all the equipment in the world, but if you don't utilize the training, it doesn't really go well. And I think that getting those people to those trainings would show us that that equipment would be utilized before sending it out, and we're just being burdensome with that. The other thing, looking in and doing some research, not trying to move the conversation away from equipment, is kind of like scaling the price. In rail, they're probably shipping large quantities. I know that Indiana and some other people do a cask system, so a one-time fee for how big of a liquid shipment that is, I think would be pretty utilized with rail, because just using a placard system with that would, and in my opinion, would be unfair to those that are shipping by truck, just because they're able to ship larger quantities, and in that incident would be a higher risk for our counties as well, and would likely involve rails are near water systems, so would likely involve a larger incident than would be on
Potentially, yeah.
road.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks, Sage. That's all good insight. On the equipment, I'm going to probably look to my team and maybe Hillary and Todd to help understand like what gear you might be thinking in your minds, just so we can kind of see. I don't even know cost. I don't know where to begin. Like those RID devices are what, 15,000? Those are really expensive.
Yeah, I absolutely would not recommend they have RIDs. There's a couple of handhelds that are actually really useful for first responders. Because like, as you said, it's not something they use very often. I know a couple offhand that would definitely be more in the like 1,000 range rather than 15 to 20,000 range.
Okay, that's much more.
Yeah, and so like there's definitely a lot of things that we can recommend to people that are easy to use. You basically just turn it on and you're like, yep, radiation's present, or nope, it's not. So there's definitely a lot of things that we can do with that. And then also we would work with Dr. Reese to make sure that our training matches his training that he provides in Eastern Oregon and in Corvallis. And then as we go along the main transportation corridors, like we'd be in conjunction, and we would, a lot of times, part of our training, and we're redoing it right now. We're really lucky. We got a intern from HISPR, which is the Hospital State Preparedness Response. I don't know. I can never remember what their acronym is, but she's been revamping all of our training for us. So we always encourage our first responders and receivers to bring the equipment that they have so we can show them how to use it. And if they don't have equipment, we're working on a list that we could say, hey, here, because we can't say you should buy this one, right? We're not ever allowed to endorse or you know. So we're working on a list, and actually Tom Baylor is on the task force for this program for portal monitors and radiation detectors, to say this is what, like, here's a list of good equipment that we recommend that you can choose from. So that's all kind of part of the training that we provide.
Yeah, Tom Taylor here. I can add a little bit to that. So, before we go out and do any training, we introduce ourselves, and then we have them send an inventory of what they have. And so we'll do a specific training on their equipment, and then we'll do a little showcase of the equipment that we have. And sometimes it perks their ears up for some deficiencies and things that they don't have and they would like to have. So we'll get training with ion chambers, some of our EPDs especially, and then we'll train those with check sources and then your basic, whole body surveying and contamination, decontamination techniques, things like that.
And then Sage, to address your question about response time. So our office is part of ORS, and anything that's radiological goes directly to our duty officer. We're 24/7. And depending on where it is, we will direct people locally to try to address it. So There's a lot of different regional hazmat offices that we can reach out to. If it's a bigger response that's required, we're allowed to activate the civil support team, which is the National Guard folks, and they are all hazards experts. And so we have done that a few times where we've activated them. They're based out of Salem, so they can generally get there within a few hours, depending on where it is. We're located in Portland, so we can generally get to most Portland folks. If it was like out in Ontario, I would probably call my colleagues in Idaho and see if there's anything they could do, because obviously they could get to Ontario within 30 to 60 minutes rather than us take 6 to 7 hours to even drive out there. So there's like a couple of different ways that we would probably address that from a response standpoint.
I don't love being reliant upon Idaho, but it's a good way to share between states, right? Like,
Yeah.
nothing against Idaho, but just like it's nice to be self-sufficient. But it's a good point. Like, we should be able to track where we'd be able to support where the needs are. Sage, go ahead.
Yeah, and I understand like the response times and everything like that. I think the other facet to this conversation is talking with our local hospitals. Because where are the patients or anybody that's affected going to go? I think that it's great to have these response teams, but in doing the exercises, different things, which is great, I think. A lot of hospitals are not going to let patients in because we don't have the adequate facilities to decon them and such, especially out in our rural facilities. So that's just one facet, and that's what gets with the funding decline, trying to find some avenues, not only just for response, but for the recovery of individuals if there were an incident, especially those that even transporting the material would have available. Is a big thing for me.
Mhm.
And one thing that I hear from a lot of emergency managers at hospitals is just the inability to even test for people that are coming in. Because once you guys know, once it gets in the hospital, we're shut down here. So
you actually, this is one of the things I'm very passionate about is first receiver training. It's not something we've been able to afford to provide for a long time. And so we have monies for, and by we, I mean Odo gives us money for the first responders, but I really, really want to train first receivers. Like, so we're ramping that up. We're starting with a couple of groups in the Portland and coastal areas, because that's who we have, who our intern has contacts with. But I really want to work with hospitals so that they understand what the hazards are, how to actually treat patients. Because yeah, you're right. In Ontario, it's the first receivers who are going to be our first responders, right? Like they're the ones who are going to be there, who can actually help people if something did happen. So first receiver training is so important, and I absolutely want some of this funding to go to us providing first receiver training. And equipment.
Yeah, and so good news is that we are piloting some new training that we've just created over the next several months to some of the larger hospitals. So I'd like to see that go out into the more rural areas.
Not to take everything. I just want to give a shout out to Steve Reese and Mark Reese and Mr. Woods here. When we did have the training here, we did have hospital attendants for that. So that was extremely beneficial because they got to interact with not only our hazmat team, but other hospitals and the EMs. And so that's an avenue that's ongoing. So just really appreciate that. Want to see that continue.
Yeah, thank you, Sage. And Hillary, we can certainly talk about how to structure the training, where the needs are greatest, and sort of make sure we're using the dollars wisely and covering the state as we're supposed to do, and making sure people have the right training that they need, whether it's first responder, first receiver, otherwise, to know what to do to respond accordingly. Sage, you mentioned, I wanted to talk a little more about trains, but not only about trains, but also about like load size and potential risk. As what I hear you said was risk-based, so to speak. Bigger loads, more volume potentially. And if it's a liquid material, risk could be greater for spillage and containment and environmental catastrophe, so to speak. If there was a spillage into a waterway or even just on the ground, be hard to clean up and contain. Are you thinking something like we should explore that concept, that based on like either type or quantity of material as a different fee structure? It would, in practice, it might be challenging, because if we use our placard as a trigger, then you have to get more information to understand sort of where, what fee and what permit applies, but I think it's something to talk about.
Yeah, so I mean, you could keep the placard system, but I think that if maybe instead of a placard system for the trains, it's by cask or something. I don't know. I'm by no means anybody in here am I an expert on how it's all transported or anything like that. But a liquidized versus a solid, and then a graduated fee structure. So instead of, $75 or whatever we come to terms with of a placard, it's just a one-time fee of transporting that cask. And I think that, the question comes is how, if it's transported by rail, having the knowledge of how many of these shipments are coming through, asking that question in this group and not having an answer of that, or not being able to track that, I think is something that I don't know if we can address, but having that information would be extremely helpful. And just knowing, that our it's not just coming through and we're not having knowledge of it, especially if it's, we're looking at Trojan or these other facilities, large liquidized contaminants coming through would be extremely helpful. And I know that we butt up right next to a federally recognized tribe, and they're speaking with their fire chief and others. It would be great if that was addressed as well, so that we could, the one-time fee, if you're looking at a larger fee for those, would cover a large substantial cost. So if it's just a one-time shipment per year of that liquefied stuff, I'm going to say stuff because I'll say something wrong with that, it would cover a substantial. Reese laughs because he knows I'm going to say something wrong. So I'll say stuff. But that might, Illinois, I think Indiana does it as well. And some other states, they do just a one-time fee of a large shipment from rail. And that might not necessarily have us change the whole placard system, but it might be a tiered system. If, hey, you're going to ship a large contaminant, this is just a one-time fee for each of those rails that are being shipped. And that's just some of the research I looked into. And I know that, and so that might necessarily have to raise the placard system this high because they're shipping different material, but just a thought.
Yeah, that's a good thought. I mean, trucks are limited simply by how much they can take by just because it's a truck, but trains seem to have much more volume potentially just by nature of what they are. I think the bottom line is we need some more information on train shipments to the state. Go ahead, Hillary.
Yeah, so I definitely obviously we're going to look into it. Oregon, as far as I'm aware, does not have as large shipments as they do in the Midwest and the South, because we don't have as many power plants. So, and even at our national lab, they don't do as much there. And I put in the chat essentially the transportation requirements for radiation. I don't believe we would have the authority to change it based on if it's a solid or liquid. Radiation transportation or radioactive material transportation is specific about the dose from whatever you're shipping. So it doesn't really matter if it's liquid or solid, or in some cases gas. So I mean, and especially Illinois, right? I think there are 3 power plants around Illinois. And so you are shipping massive amounts of things. And the things that come through our state are generally from the Navy. And so that would be a federal thing. And so that is a bit different than what they're dealing with power plants. But it's definitely a really good question. And I'm imagining that is why they actually have that in place, is because they do have those big shipments a lot. And it'd be good to base ourselves off of it.
Maybe a little more information from other neighboring states is also what I hear. Hillary, you might be thinking to understand what others. Illinois has 11 nuclear power plants, by the way. Most in the country. We have some data on other states. I will share it with this group after the call, maybe in an email, something like that, just to share the information. It's not the challenge with the other state programs that we've looked into it. It's not all consistent. Not all states, they all have different systems, right? They have different permits and fees associated with different types of material. And they don't always use the placarding like we do. It's sort of, there's just different ways, and each state has something that seems slightly different. So it's hard to compare exactly, but as just some more data and more information, we'll share it with the group.
Yeah. And I can reach out to CRCPD, because that's the whole point of CRCPD, is we recognize that all states have some base guidelines, but we do things differently. And I believe there is a transportation working group that I can reach out to see what they do, and see if they have any resources that they can provide for us.
That would be great. I mean, maybe someone could even speak to us at the next RAC meeting about that. I don't know. That might be an idea, or at least share some information that we can then share back with the group here. Okay. What are the thoughts people might have about this? About anything, really? We're pretty open here. Other questions or information needs that people think they might want us to look for and share back with the group?
I'm going to speak up just because I don't know how many transporters we actually have on the working group.
We have 2, I believe, plus OTA.
Okay, depending on your fleet and how often you transport, I honestly do not know exactly verbatim how much we paid in doing the $70 per shipment to Oregon for the past couple of years. I know other than Oregon, we're already spending over $300,000 a year in just permits, not including the ones that we're doing with Oregon. Some states have actually implemented a shipper-based permit. Every time a shipper sends a Category 1, a Category 2, or a higher level of material through the state, the shipper actually has to share that cost. For Oregon, it's a little difficult for us to turn around and raise our price to our customers because we aren't invoiced every single time. We are invoiced quarterly. And it's hard to show a shipper or, one customer, hey, we paid $2,600 this quarter. Of this, 5 of these shipments were yours. So not trying to push it completely away from the transporter, but might want to consider looking into, I know the different category. Cat 1, Cat 2, those are the higher level RAD shipments. I would look at potentially the shippers who are shipping them through. That's what the Midwestern I always called it the Midwestern Tribe. It's Midwestern Radioactive Material Transport Project. They've got a list in their book. There's also one for the East Coast, one for the West Coast. Instead of just tossing it at the transporter, maybe share that wealth a little bit.
So you might, Tammy, might, if I can understand, the whoever owns that material and you're shipping it on their behalf, is that what you mean by the shipping? Like whoever owns the destination of the material, is that what you mean?
Yes, us the transporters, we're just trucking companies. We get a call that says, come pick this material up next Monday and take it over here.
Okay.
That's all we're doing. But your shipper, they're the ones who, at this nuclear facility, they're calling and saying, I need to ship this much material over to Clive for disposal, or we're picking up in California because they're shutting this nuclear plant down and all of this material has to go through here for disposal. So just maybe consider other avenues while we're doing this.
Okay, so if we had a system where you were able to track specifically which permit was for which load, would that be helpful? And if you could tie, instead of getting a quarterly invoice, rather you had some specific, something that was more detailed, on May 28th, this shipment went through Oregon, you had a permit associated with it, and then you could track it back to which shipper it was. Would that be useful?
That may be, because when you're doing it, you have to put in your port of origin when you're doing your permit. But again, right now we're quarterly, and if you get somebody to pick something up for you, when they drop it off, they're going, okay, here's the invoice, pay me. It's just hard to back up weeks and months later and say, oh yeah, we also need to tack this on.
Okay, I hear you. I'll make a note of that. All right, it's a lot to consider there. Mark, you got your hand up. Go ahead.
I just want to say thank you to Tammy and your colleagues, because that's the information we need as we start these meetings. What is your experience basically as a customer from the shippers, and how do we compare to the other states that you're working with? So I appreciate that information, and please, your colleagues that are part of this today, let us know how it's working for you, because that's part of the information that we hope to get this committee involved in too, is also that business practice side. You talked about trucking companies are paying it, but other states are doing it differently. So please share that information with us about how that's working.
Yeah.
Iowa and Missouri, both of those have shipper permits that are required. Sometimes the transporter will get the permit for the shipper, but we have that invoice as soon as we do it, and it's usually $100. I think 150 tops. Off the top of my head, I can't remember everybody else. Iowa, that may be hazardous waste. Sometimes Iowa will get us per shipment. I'm trying to scroll through really fast my little thing. Connecticut has a Connecticut RAD, and it may just be 35 or 40. It's been a while since I've had to get one, but most of those require the shipper go in. Missouri has a really good system going down, because they track it per location. They've got their EPA ID number and everything in there. And when they're ordering that permit, they know that that nuclear facility is sending something straight through their state, and they can kind of track it a little better.
Okay, that's something we can definitely look into. Kind of see how that can function better. It sounds like there's some other states we could learn from too. Heather, go ahead. What's on your mind?
I just wanted to bounce off Tammy a little bit here. I was looking at my for the first quarter of this year. I realized is that every time I register a load coming in or going out of the state, I do it online, and then I get a thank you, for transmitting this. And we used to get a little paper, wasn't a receipt, but it showed that we entered it in. Would it not be possible for who runs your ODOE Power App to maybe, instead of just making that a thank you for being here, it could be like a receipt? And then we get it instantaneously. I'd be able to put it right in with my invoice.
Well, that might be a good idea. Let me look into that. I've talked to the IT guys. I don't know why we couldn't do that. But that's
like I said before, I would even print it out for some of my drivers who were really old school and wanted to see that on a piece of paper. So used to get that. I don't even get that anymore. But it seems like we could go back to something like that, just with the
So you're talking about when we had the portal that we set up a few years ago, you can enter your information and then pay the fee. If you had a digital receipt that came out of that system.
Or even if it's maybe not a receipt because we pay at the end of the quarter, but this is how much this would cost, right?
Yeah. Okay.
The amount, something that would.
Right. Okay. Okay, we'll look into that too. Todd Carpenter.
Hi, Max. I was just curious, is there any, or do you have any drafted rule text yet?
No.
And then, okay. And then the second question, is there any amendments or new rules other than just fees being considered in this rulemaking?
Yeah. I mean, I think all what we're talking about here could be under consideration, like whether trains should be included, whether there should be a graduated fee or something different, or I don't know that we need to necessarily put it in rule related to this conversations on the shipper or the transportation company, but we could. I think that's all open for dialogue here. Yeah, it's not just about the fee. And just because we don't have draft rules isn't because we're lazy. In our defense, we legitimately want to have these meetings and have these dialogues before, even starting writing stuff down.
Gotcha. Yeah. The reason I kind of threw that in there is that what for people, Radiation Protection Services receives calls from scrap metal, waste transfer station facilities, because naturally occurring radioactive material is caught in the entryways or for these pathways. And then our staff have to issue what's called Department of Transportation special permits. And so right now, there's no, we're doing it just as voluntarily to help out the transportation and waste industries. But I would like to consider that perhaps we could have a fee for issuing those special permits. And that would just cover the costs of issuing the permits and the personnel time that it requires. And also, just FYI, we also issue special permits to the railroad carrier. So I do know that occasionally they do have radioactive materials. It's usually in scrap metal loads, but so they do have a leg in this project.
Now, are those placarded loads, Todd? If it's just scrap, I don't think so.
Well, the problem is that they didn't know that they had radioactive material or what's called naturally occurring radioactive material in part of that shipment. And then it gets spotted out on what we call portal monitors at waste transfer sites. And that material has to go back to the origin where it came from. And then by issuing a special permit, that's kind of like applying a placard through the carrier, if that makes sense. And that happens probably 3 to 5 times a month.
So I don't think it's considered placarded, Todd. So essentially the idea behind these special permits is that, as Todd said, the carrier had no idea they were holding radioactive materials. And if the person who receives it can identify who the carrier was, with scrap waste, it's very easy, but with kind of just general commercial waste, it can be a little harder. And so if radioactive material is ever on the road, you have to have a permit for it. And that's where this kind of comes into place, these special permits. These were created, I think, back in the 80s or 70s in order to address that. And yeah, and we get anywhere from like 3 to 4 a week to 3 to 4 a month. It's kind of hit or miss depending on what's going around.
Yeah, Tom, go ahead.
Just a question, are those special permits different than the temporary permits that are supposed to be $100 per, or are they the same
Yes,
thing and we're just not
they're
collecting?
different.
Okay.
They're different. So they were, I can find a little bit more information on them for you, but yeah, there's no funding or revenue that comes through them. They're specific for you got a load, a waste load, your portal alarm went off, you want to send it back. And so even at the national level, there's no funding or permit fee or anything like that associated with them, as far as I'm aware.
I wonder if that's something that the RAC would be interested in considering for the special permits as well as the temporary DOT permits.
Yeah, I think the temporary permit, the $100 one, Tom, that still is triggered by a placard shipment, right? So this is something kind of different.
And the special permit gives the carrier the authority to not be placard per se, but so you're giving the special permit that allows an exemption. And so that's kind of how this process works. Yeah.
Okay. Do you have is there an OHA rule around that special permit?
That's the interesting thing is we have no statute authority to issue these permits. In our statutes, we point to Department of Transportation as having the authority. So that's why I'm saying we're doing it voluntarily, but the folks that would have the statutory authority under this program would actually be Oregon DOT. So we can't ask for since we don't have the statute or the authority, excuse me, we can't ask for funding directly for what the service we provide. We would have to enter into an interagency agreement to receive funding for this process.
I'm calling Jess Brown at ODOT. Do you have any insight into this? Is that something you're familiar with?
I can look into that. I know that what we end up with is those permits when they're purchased, they just process through us and the money then flows over to you guys at DOE. I'd have to do some more research. I guess I don't have a good answer for you right now.
Yeah, that's okay. All right. We kind of might have to noodle on that one, Todd and Hillary, a little bit more. And you're just talking about the permits, and I've seen those sometimes. Those come across our email, but not always. That like if a rejected load at a portal and it gets sent back to the origin.
Yeah, that's what we're talking about. And it's I put in the chat here CRCP transportation, so it has kind of everything that's like associated with that. That is kind of known, and the special permits are on there. So 10,656 and 11,406 for either commercial waste or scrap waste. And yeah, we have to issue them fairly frequently.
Okay, I'll have to noodle on that a little bit. Jeremy, thanks for putting the link in the chat to the Midwest Planning Guide. We'll look at that. What else do we have to discuss here? Any other topics folks want to dive into? Odo team, anything we haven't covered that we need to?
I think we're good.
I might say I only heard when it comes to continuing funding, there's going to be some research done, but I've only heard, kind of linking it to inflation. Were there any ideas on that front?
So I'll just make a comment on that. I think linking it to inflation makes sense, but I always have concerns about long-term indexing. Maybe if we were to link it to inflation, we have some sort of caveat in there where it's still going to be reviewed, on a periodic basis, whatever that might be.
You could do that. You could do an inflation adjustment annually with a review every 5 years or 10 years or something like that. Some regular review where the council gets together this body or, the
right
equivalent of this body in the future to talk about it.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that, you have a 2020 year and then increasing that versus, a 5-year basis or something would be, or a 4 or 3, getting together would be a lot more economically efficient, and it would give time for companies to adjust to that price change versus if you just get, here's a yearly 7%. That would be a big price change. And I think keeping that in mind, that those companies would need to be able to change and adjust to that would be helpful.
So you're suggesting, Sage, like once every 5 years, we do an inflation adjustment?
I don't know if it needs to be that. I'm not economically sound in all those, but I think, looking at it from, these are individuals and businesses working in the industry, having the ability to adjust to that, even if it was, a 2-year basis, and then giving a certain amount of time for that to adjust, I think would be helpful. But that's all I have to say about that.
Okay. Jess, go ahead.
Yeah, in thinking about the permitting question that came up earlier, so what we do in Oregon, as far as ODOT goes, we follow federal regulations. So if they have to have a permit or a hazmat registration with the feds, that's what we look at. Back in, I want to say 2002, maybe early 03, we had a permit process requirement, but we did away with that. And I don't remember the reasons exactly. I was pretty low on the food chain then, so it just sort of happened and I didn't get a vote, so to speak. We liked it because it helped us identify carriers, types of carriers, containers, things that they were using, cargo tanks and such. But so nowadays we don't mandate a hazmat specific permit. So I don't know that we would be able to just, in those loads you're talking about that turn up to be radioactive to some extent, I'm not sure we could have a mechanism to require a permit. That makes sense.
From the beginning, right? Because it's not known that they're radioactive until they end up at a, transfer station or other, landfill, and it triggers a on-site detector.
Right. And then, the way we follow the federal regulations, it's, is it enough to require a placard? And so if we were doing, for instance, roadside truck inspections, we would look to see placards are required on the shipping papers, take a look at the load, and then take a look at that federal HM registration as well. So some of the shipments, as memory serves, some of them come back, they do trip the meters or the sensors to indicate some degree of radioactivity, but it may not be enough to trigger a placarding requirement.
Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
So this,
Okay.
the temporary permit conversation might be a good one for ODO, RPS, and ODOT to have outside the rack as a starting point. It seems like there's something we should work out amongst ourselves, and then figure out whether there's whether it's appropriate for a fee for that.
That's not a bad idea, Tom. So we're saying that, Hillary, your position is that RPS issues those permits because a state agency has to do so, and it's going to fall into RPS. Is that sort of why that is in your shop? And is it also the case that because once it's known that a load is radioactive, you don't know how much radioactivity is in it. If it just goes through a portal log, those are just yes, no sort of devices.
Mhm. Yeah,
That-
so so DOT, and this is true of a lot of agencies. As soon as you say radiation, they want someone else to work on it. So the rad control programs across the states are the ones who issue the DOT permits with permission of the DOT because DOT doesn't want to do it. And we are the ones who are the experts in the state, so it does make sense that we do it. That being said, we, as Todd said earlier, we don't have regulatory authority over shippers. And we do this with the permission of DOT. So none of these, I won't say none. It is highly unlikely that these shipments would be placarded. In my time here, there's only one or two that I saw that probably should have been, and we didn't find out till after the fact. And that was because it was like a fixed or a portable nuclear gauge that was crushed, and so all the shielding was gone. And we wouldn't have allowed them to be moved in the first place if we had realized that's what they were. They didn't tell us till after the fact and after they moved it. So that being said, a lot of these wouldn't be placarded. And if they would be placarded, we would not let them leave the facility, if that kind of makes sense. So if it's not something that we can quickly identify as norm, as in the pipe scale, or medical waste, then we send people out to be like, okay, what is that? And we do a lot of training with our waste facilities so that they can identify, do we think this is medical waste, or do we think this is something else? So none of these would be placarded. The reason we issue the special permits is when we do send it back, if that truck did get in an accident, we want our first receivers to know, oh, hey, by the way, there might be some medical waste in the back of that truck that you need to be wary of, and that's why they're issued. Does that kind of help?
Yeah,
clarify
I can
things?
see the logic, right? It's sort of that you can't unring the bell. Once you know something has a level of radioactivity, you need to do something
Mhm.
with it.
Exactly.
And if it's uncertain sort of what it is and how hot it is, then you need to do your diligence and understand exactly what's going on there. It's for safety. I mean, that's a fundamental
Yeah, it's
safety thing.
purely for safety.
Tom P here. Yeah, another thing we're doing is like we're assessing the dose to the driver because they're an unmonitored person. So like if they're getting greater than 2 MR per hour, that's something we wouldn't want to send off. Just an example there.
And that's 2 millirem per hour for non-rad folks. So that is the if you're not a radiation worker, that is the dose limit that we apply for non-radiation workers.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, we got 15 minutes left in our time block here. I have been taking notes, and I think my colleagues have as well. We got a lot of things to look into, and we got to schedule another meeting for some time in the future. So we will put together, Tom Jackman, is it right? We'll put together notes from this meeting and share that with the group. We've got some homework on our side to look into, share some information, collect information and share it. And then I think we'll probably use the doodle poll feature again to find a time that works for most people for the next meeting, which will probably be, I don't know, July, August, something like that, towards that time frame. we'll need some time to look into the questions that have been raised here today. Jackman, that sound like a good plan?
Yes, that sounds like a great plan. And also, just as a reminder, this is the informal part of the rulemaking process. So if, there's nothing stopping you from, and reaching out to anybody on our team and saying like, oh, I had this idea, we could try this or whatever. We don't have to wait until the next RAC meeting to like formally present ideas or whatever. This is a collaboration. Certainly, it would be helpful that you could just send all to the group or whatever. And if it's something that you'd want the group to consider, you send it to just Max or whatever. He might send it out to the rest of the RAC to say, hey, what do you guys think about this idea? So we are working towards the next RAC group where we can have sort of a more formalized discussion about all of this stuff. But yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point, Tom. If anybody wants to talk specifically one-on-one, call, email, that's great. We're glad to talk. Additional information to be shared that you might have, please do so. You can either share it with the whole group from the email that was associated with setting this meeting, or ask us to send out to the group. We'd glad to do that for you as well. There's my email and my phone number there on this last slide. Anything, just as a note, anything you submit to a government agency is a public record, so keep that in mind with what you share with us. And we will take notes, we'll compile the notes, and we'll share back out with the group. We'll get a web page going. I think we have one already, but we'll make sure we share that web page link with this group, and we'll share these slides. We'll post those up there. I don't think we just finished these. Sorry, we're a little slow in the process. We will get all the material together that was shared today, put it on the website, and then do our homework and be in touch. All right, any questions now on next steps? Anything else to go through? Okay, well, hearing nothing, why don't we wrap up the meeting? Thank you all very much for coming today and for sharing your opinions and for following along. And we'll keep it going. We'll keep this process going. A lot of good feedback here, a lot of good questions, information. I'm thinking, based on this conversation, we may want to get a railroad industry rep to come join our next meeting or join the RAC formally. That might be a good thing to do. If we're talking about the railroad seriously, we probably should find somebody from that industry. So we'll work on that as well. Cool. Well, thanks everybody. Have a good rest of the day, and we will be in touch.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks all. Okay.
Thanks, everybody.